Hello, ladies. First off, I just want to tell you again how sorry I am that you lost jobs that were hard to get and that you enjoyed doing and that you were not expecting to lose as soon as you did. I know that, Susanny, you were a program analyst for the National Institutes of Health, and Adriana, you were a Science for Development Fellow at USAID. You were both told in mid-February that your positions are no longer needed. Is that accurate? Okay. All right. So now you both spend a fair amount of time on Capitol Hill, trying to make a case for action for lawmakers. What exactly are each of you trying to do? Susanny, let me start with you.
So me, Adriana, and a couple hundred others now so far have been part of an organization called Feds Work for You, and the group specifically that goes into the Senate Hart Building, Russell and Dirksen buildings, is part of the Fork Off Coalition, which is aptly named from the Fork of the Road emails that many of us were receiving before we got illegally fired. And what we do is that we go into Senate offices and demand to speak with senators and senior staff so that they can hear our stories and we can ask them questions on how they are going to be helping fired federal workers and to pause the fundings and the elimination of these agencies and departments. And if they listen to us and they talk to us, we talk to them and we let them know. And if they don't, well, we sit down and say, well, because we've been fired, why don't we sit here and have a little time to do our job search? Because we kind of need work, right? So we sit in, we take our laptops, we do our job search, or we look at, pass out resumes until someone speaks with us or they decide to kick us out, which is something that's happened several times. We have been able to do some quite impactful work with these events that we've been handling. They happen every Tuesday at 10 a.m. We start at the Hart Building. For example, during the week of the State of the Union, quite a few senators and representatives had invited a few of the members of our group to go to the State of the Union to represent fired federal workers. We had inspired several senators to put out whistleblower coalitions so that other fired federal workers and current workers can give details on what is happening within the federal government and within agencies.
Wow.
And this is something that's continuous. And our group continues to grow every time we go on Tuesday because people are starting to they're starting to notice that awareness and putting a face to the federal government. It will remove this rhetoric of that we're just drugs. And we're not drugs. Tapestry of different humans who are working to provide services for the American public. And all we want to do is uphold the Constitution and to continue to do the work that people voted for that had, provide funding for that their taxpayers go towards.
How big is this? How big has the group grown to, the people who show up on Tuesday at this point?
Well, in our Instagram, we have close to 10,000 followers, and around 150 of us came in last event. Yeah, and it grew. That's like the highest number, and we're expecting next week to probably get a lot more because we always get more traction in our social media. If you share it, Reddit, Instagram, Blue Sky, and every time we post, we always get more people saying, "How do I join? When is it going to be?" And it's always new people.
Excellent. Adriana, you've been there too?
Yeah, so I started going a couple weeks ago as well. It was just, naturally shared throughout our network groups and events. And during this time, it was a smaller group, right? Because, USAID was the first victim of this Doge, right? So now, now they're going after the Department of Education. They're going after everyone, every agency. The group is naturally, organically starting to grow as more and more people are being affected. But yes, I started going a few weeks ago. Really my first time doing this type of work, this type of volunteer work, advocacy work on the Hill. It's definitely to tell everyone it's a crash course in political savviness and science diplomacy, things of that nature. And slowly, the Fork Off Coalition does a great job kind of, splitting us into groups to go and visit different senators, Congress people. And then recently I also started getting involved with the One USAID group as well. And their focus is a little bit more targeted. We schedule meetings with staffers and a little bit more of an organized thing just because of the extensive dismantling attacks right now that the agency is going through.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about that political savvy, because I'm just wondering, who have you been able, on the Republican side, who have you been able to get to talk to you or listen to you?
We've actually been able to do a lot of progress with Senator Murkowski of Alaska. We met for a couple of times, and she's actually sat and talked to us about how these federal hirings are affecting Alaska, and the fundings are affecting Alaska, to the point where she's actually put out a few social media blasts talking about discussing this with a few members of her group, and how what is happening is completely unsatisfactory and very dangerous for the American people.
Yeah, and I think another example would be we met with Senator Lindsey Graham's deputy chief of staff a couple weeks ago. I think this was during my first time on the Hill. And he was a former Marine, so he understood. A lot of us were from USAID in that visit, federal contractors, workers, or whatnot. So he understood as a former military the importance of soft power. So there was a lot of going discussions with him, and he met with us. We didn't even have a scheduled appointment. So those are great opportunities to open up the conversations. And obviously, there aren't going to be things where their opinions and our opinions lie, but the conversation is there, and at least the acknowledgement about soft USAID and is present. Another example from this week, or I think it was from last week, was also with Senator Haggerty from Tennessee.
Okay.
We were able to meet with a couple of his staffers. Very kind.
Let me stop you there. What are they saying to you, though? I mean, they're letting you in the door, but are they saying anything to you that's helpful about their perspective on what Elon Musk is doing or Doge is doing? What are they dropping any tidbits to you guys on how they feel about these firings?
Yeah.
Lindsey's deputy chief of staff is a great example of that, and where he talks about he was formerly with the military before he took the position at Lindsey's office, and he discussed how he found a lot of the things that were happening very unsavory, and that there's a lot of inside conversations with senators about how angry they feel about what's going on with Elon Musk and Doge and the overreach that's happening, and they feel that this overreach definitely is an impingement on their checks and balances and their legislative power. So there is a lot of grumbling in Congress, especially from what we're hearing from senior staff about what's happening with Elon Musk and Doge. And we've also seen that publicly with cabinet secretaries like Marco Rubio having a fight in the White House with Elon Musk himself.
Right.
So there is a lot of anger and a lot of frustration.
Yeah, and I will add to that. I think it really depends on the senator. When you ask specifically on the Republican side, I think it really, we have some staffers that they're taking notes, they're asking questions, they're heavily engaged. You can see that they're rationalizing with us, and they're going through and they're seeing these discrepancies and these overreaches, and they're concerned. And then you have other staffers where, you really just think that they're seeing us to see us, and,
Right.
and they're just doing their job to listen to us. And I don't know how much of that is actually going to do a difference with those specific offices, but, the effort is there, the dialogue is there.
Okay.
And the pressure is there as well, because this is the main reason why we do this, is to apply pressure and to show them that you're not just firing a bunch of liberals or a bunch of people who are just collecting a paycheck. You're firing people who are your constituents,
Right.
people who are doing important work in your state, people that you claim that you are representing. Now, and you said you were going to save their jobs, and you were pro-business, and you were going to provide them with, affordability and all these things. And you're taking away the only thing that's making their lives affordable, their jobs.
Yeah, and I think something really important to that is that, it really puts a face to the issue, because a lot of times, we talk about the bureaucracy or the federal bureaucracy of the workforce as if this abstract group of people, right? But it's not an abstract group of people. It's your neighbors, it's your friends, it's your daughters, it's your sons. It's just everyday Americans that are either directly involved in civil service, or they're working there through contracting mechanisms, or, the scientists. for me, it's just more of humanizing this issue that is not just, some bureaucrats that don't care about, anything or anyone.
Right. What about the Democrats? Have you talked to Democrats and asked them what they, as the minority party, are planning to do or trying to do?
So we have spoken to a lot of senators and representatives. We spoke to Van Hollen's office. Senator Van Hollen is very active with meeting with federal workers. He went to the March for Science rally. He has met with a few of us. He went directly to our event on Tuesday to speak with federal workers at our Take It to the Senate event and address the press with us, saying that we need to go back to us federal workers need to be sent back to work because of the important work that we're doing. But he has been very adamant about relying on the courts and on the judicial process of all of this, which is great. But we do believe that, and this is something that he's not the only one, that other senators have called for this as well, with the exception of Bernie Sanders and other progressives who are asking for more dire tactics. But he and other senators who are doing this all in good faith and goodwill, of course, they want us to go back to work, but they need to understand that there needs to be more than just allowing the courts, because that's a process that can take a while. And this is urgent because they're now shredding documents. They're now their positions are now being terminated. People who are on administrative leave are going to no longer be on administrative leave because their positions are going to be terminated on the 14th of March. They're eliminating departments. Their RIF, which is reducing in force entire departments. This is time of the essence of them.
Right.
And so waiting for the courts or waiting for, due process to happen is too slow for hundreds of thousands of workers who depended on, the federal government for their jobs and the services that millions more depend on every day.
Right.
And I'll add to that as well. Right now, what the courts are looking at is really federal workers, right? Direct hires, federal employees. Contractors are also being affected. Small not-for-profits or small companies that also had awards or contracts with the U.S. government are also being affected. But, they're not as protected as federal employees as well, right? So it's almost like a trickle-down effect. And also, if the courts do side with the federal employees, that's fantastic. But, there's already so much damage that was done to others. And even so, you still have people that are happily laid off and that have to figure out how to do unemployment. Do they qualify for Medicaid? If they have children, do they need to enroll in SNAP? Do they need to do different things? So that's great that we're hoping that the judicial system does what it's supposed to do. But I think that, times of the essence, and there's people really suffering right now.
Right. And I know it's easy to say that, that they need to do something else, but there is, and not providing an actual example, but there is a direct act that they can do, and it's to remove Elon Musk and Doge from the White House and from our agencies. Because the only reason we're in all of this is because Elon Musk is stealing from the American public. He is in these departments. He has access to all of these sensitive systems. He has blocked payment systems, particularly for USAID, payment systems that are supposed to provide all the funding and money to partners who are depending on us and relying on us to pay for the contracts and distribution of food, which are not being blocked because these payment systems are blocked by Elon. And this is something that they can do right now.
So is anyone, let me stop you. Is anyone talking about legislation? I mean, you're talking to senators all the time. Is anyone talking? Because that's their only means. They don't really have a way to, force the executive branch to do something unless they pass a bill. So is anyone talking?
Well, I did see some some action or some talk about in the press about potentially stripping Doge of its power or something along those lines. So that would be helpful. Whether or not that passes, that's a question.
But you haven't heard any details about that bill in the halls when you guys are in the Capitol.
No.
A lot of inside conversations, unfortunately. A lot of it trying to push that, Doge wants to push any further firings or funding pauses. It has to be an act of Congress.
Yeah. What I will bring up, something that was brought up in one of our meetings with a Democratic congresswoman, was that, this whole continuing resolution and the appropriations, right? And so the idea is, the fact that right now the current appropriations for this fiscal year are not being respected, who's to say if they do continue resolution, those appropriations are going to be respected for the next fiscal year. So it's really,
Fair point. Yeah.
it's up in
Yeah, which is why a lot of federal
Right.
workers and a lot of people, particularly who are supporting federal workers and even people in DC, support a government shutdown. Because if they're not respecting the funding that's already been allocated for these departments, for these workers, even for a district like DC, then they're not going to respect any CR that goes along the way. So why not shut it down and make sure that they do the work they're supposed to be doing and pass the funding that was allocated for these agencies to do their work before they even decide on another.
Are you guys targeting additional senators this week? Because this would be the week that they're trying to
I think
make it all happen.
yeah, so on different notes, yeah. So I think the Fork Coalition, I think they're continuously going to visits. It's not just Tuesday.
Right.
Although Tuesday is like the big day, the
Right.
main day.
Okay.
They have different agency advocacy groups, I guess you could say, going. So for example, there were people today advocating for USAID yesterday, today. If we can schedule things throughout the week, people will go throughout the week.
Right.
I know this was similar as well at NIH.
Yes. So at NIH, a group of us that were with the Fork Coalition have branched out to be a group of fired NIH workers. And we are actually going to be meeting with Senator Van Hollen's staff on Thursday.
They all
tomorrow.
run together. Yeah.
There's so much going on. And so tomorrow we're going to be meeting with them to discuss their stories and discuss tactics. And it's similar groups like that where this Work Off Coalition has allowed like so many federal workers who have felt alone throughout this entire process to find other workers who are in the same predicament. And that has allowed us to group together or to band together and to go and target specific senators based on their stances on health policy or their stances on the NIH, or they made spirited speeches and marches or protests or in the Congress floor somewhere talking about how these institutions should not be compromised. And Senator Van Hollen was one because he went to the March for Science rally on Saturday.
Okay.
And so that's targeting him specifically. But we also are in talks, probably meeting with some other senators like Bernie Sanders, Senator Warren.
Well, let me stop you again, because here's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if you're talking, because right now, for the Senate to pass anything, they need to get 7 Democrats. So I'm wondering if you're talking to any of the Democrats that are afraid they might lose, like Fetterman or something like that.
Yes, we did that. You did that this Tuesday. The Tuesday event was a focus on that, where we talked to Gallego, we talked to Fetterman, we talked to the 2 senators from Colorado, we talked to Senator King. They were our main targets when we were trying to find which senators were either hard yes or leaning yes. And then we used those meetings to talk about how if you allow the CR to go through, this is going to allow Elon Musk to have even more power, federal funding, and firings of these employees. It's going to not only target probationary employees, not only are about to be fired, but the majority of the employees that are in your state. Because Fetterman, I think, has close to over 60,000 employees in his state. Colorado has around 12,000 employees. And a lot of these they're not just spread out in different agencies. They take up huge chunks of a certain agency.
Yeah.
I think Maine, for example, I don't know if my numbers are wrong here, but Maine, their federal employees are in VA. It's gonna play huge issues. And also, Nebraska's another one we talked to. I can't remember the senator's name. The U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, which is one of the most renowned research centers on beef, in the world. And Nebraska is considered the main beef exporter in the states. There's scientists that are being fired, and if this CR goes through them, who knows how many more will be fired from that center. And there are a lot of cattlemen who are very worried what's happening in that center. And so we've been talking to those senators specifically, not just saying stop federal firings, but specifically targeting them because they might be leaning yes, but this is how it's going to affect you if you say yes to the CR because of all your constituents, not just in general, the federal government.
We do try to be strategic, like Susanny was saying. And we also, the group has grown where we can be hey, who has ties to Florida 26? Hey, who has, and to really be like, no, I'm a constituent and this really is affecting me, to also even be more impactful than just like, this agency donated this much to this university and then this is how. So we are trying to be strategic in that sense as well. And I also, just to add on the Tuesday Coalition and the events, I will say, at least for me, it's given me the opportunity to listen to my colleagues' stories. Because I know my stories as a fellow at the agency, but to listen to, someone from the Forest Service, or to listen to someone that was on the foodborne illness team, like for the FDA,
right.
So listening to their stories, that also empowers us
Right.
and we learn from that. And we're like, no, this isn't just hearsay,
Right.
And we also invite supporters and organizers to join. So we have a lot of people who, didn't even work in the federal government, but joined to provide support. And they were able to learn so much about what the federal government does and all the services that we provide just by talking to us.
Oh, let's back up and talk about, essentially what was lost in ending your jobs. Both of you spoken to me about the effect on the science of losing each of you in your positions. Susanny, let's talk first about what, essentially what your job meant to the American people, because the reason why, at least, the president's supporters are not on him yet about losing all these services is because they don't necessarily know how this impacts their lives. So if you're talking to somebody out in the middle of Iowa, like why would you tell them your job is important?
Well, there's a reason why the NIH is considered the crown of the federal government and received so much bipartisan support from both Republicans and Democrats because of the amount of research in clinical trials and for medicines and cures for over 10,000 diseases that affect millions of Americans every day in this country. And what I did at my job as a program analyst for the National Center of Biotechnology Information at the NIH was that I handled databases that collected raw information about these diseases and about specific infectious and viral diseases so that doctors, researchers, clinicians could collect from that data and do the research needed so that, groundbreaking and life-saving work to find cures and treatments for these diseases, even the most rarest forms of diseases, could be done and could be collected from our databases. It's very sensitive work. It's very detailed work that requires some people with a lot of dedication, a lot of experience, and a lot of education in biotechnology and data and analytics in general. We're seeing right now, these are databases that have, over 40 years of existence and of data. And now these funding and swarms of workers have now been fired and the funding has been paused for a lot of the work that's being done at NCBI. And this is going to be a huge detriment to a lot of Americans because it's going to cause a lot of first panic within the research and medical community because they're not going to be worried if they're going to have unfettered access to this information like they did before. Because one thing that the NIH and us at NCBI were very lauded for was the fact that we were very open access and we were very, we worked very hard towards trying to make sure that this data was as open and as accessible as possible. And now there's a lot of people worried if that information is going to be available or these websites. We were the number 2 website visited in the United States under informed delivery for USPS, which was a website for people who track their packages. Now people are worried if those websites are going to be useful anymore. I mean, we've seen there have been examples how these websites being shut down or non-operational since Elon Musk took over and started meddling in NIH. And so that's what worries me, and that's what should worry every American. The lack of access to this data will now cause pauses or issues with any of the important work that's being done to find cures for a lot of diseases here in this country. And this is the type of work that should never stop. We should never be putting pauses on this because people die. This will cause a lot of pain and this will cause a lot of trauma. People who are waiting for trials and for medications and for vaccines for the diseases that they are suffering.
Thank you. That puts a fine point on it for sure. Adriana is saying for you, you were involved in disease prevention to a certain extent. Explain how losing your job has impacted.
Sure. Yes, of course. So I started working at the agency as a Science for Development Fellow. And basically what that was, a program, it's a pipeline program geared to recruiting talented early career doctors in STEM. So I'm an epidemiologist by training. I have a PhD in public health. My specialization is epidemiology. I publish different topics within the field. And the program was to bring talented young researchers that were just starting their career after the doctorate into the agency and to identify people that were interested in international development and global health. So that's how I ended as a fellow at USAID. The type of work that I did was mostly going to be evaluations as well. So the agency is really a funder, right? So USAID really works with these other partners. We call them implementing partners. They call them implementing partners. And, and to establish these programs, right? On HIV prevention, on endemic planning interventions, on malaria, whatever it may be. So at the agency, you need people with a high-end technical expertise and technical background to evaluate these programs and make sure the programs that we're giving funding to are using the right methods, are calculating things a specific way or a better way, or in this case, at this level, with my cohort, we might be a little bit more up to date on certain best practices or the new research that's coming out. So basically, my role was to help with that technical and the evaluations of our programs that were being funded. And additionally to that, even though you're placed as a fellow at certain offices, as a fellow, they kind of, the focus is also to develop you as a leader and develop your professional skill set and leadership skill set in the agency with the hopes that you stay in the federal workforce and that you eventually want to become a federal worker. So that's kind of the elements that I worked on.
Right. So what do you say to people, though, who think that our tax dollars are being wasted abroad in programs like these?
On foreign aid, you're asking? Well, I thank you for that question. As I think I'm very passionate on this because I think that it's not a waste. Almost all of the projects that we do have some sort of return on investment to the American people, to the American public. Either that's creating jobs or that's strengthening national security, decreasing violence abroad, decreasing resentment towards the American government and American people. It also supports farmers. 40% of the Bureau for Humanitarian, food, the money spent on food came from U.S. farmers. So it also, like I said, there's return on investments on these programs. This isn't like what Secretary Rubio said, it's charity. This is not charity. There's a reason for this. Like, yes, it is the right thing to do to help less fortunate and vulnerable populations. As a public health professional, that is kind of my guiding star.
Right.
But I also think it also helps the American community and the American people. I also say, for individuals, I've heard this too, well, we need to focus on things here. We need to do this. And I'm saying this is 1% of our federal budget. This is 1 penny out of $1. And not only that is that, one, we're getting return on investment, right? So we are also getting that. And how is it not possible to walk and talk at the same time? We're the United States of America. How are you telling me that we cannot, do 1%, less 1% in federal aid to make the world a better place and help us stay as the good guys, and also at the same time use the rest of the 99% to domestic programs and domestic funding? So that's kind of where I get, get really frustrated about, like, how is it not possible that we can do both?
Right.
One day we become this one or the other. So I think that's how I would.
Yeah. But let me ask you both, though. I mean, because I know that each of you were there for relatively short amounts of time. It's not like you were both there for years in your jobs. But I wonder if there's any acknowledgement of any kind of, I don't know, bloat, or is there, surely there's an argument for some measure of greater efficiency in either of the organizations. Would you not concede that? Or would you say that everything is like, when you were there, was running on such a smooth way, there was no waste at all? There was nothing to complain about. I mean,
yeah.
I have to add. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a reason why all these agencies have budgets. There's a reason why we pass a budget every year. And in order for it's so that we can have oversight committees. The reason why we have oversight committees, it's not we be able to find any waste and fraud within the federal government. There is a lot of course, modernization that we could really do, but those are all works in progress already. I could speak, for example, for mine, and where we were working a lot towards trying to use AI for a lot of the research that we were doing with NIH, and that was part of our budget that we were pushing towards Congress as well. And then we also have an entire department that does that as well. I think the GSA. USDS is the one. And there's an entire department for that already. So this idea that they have no idea that they had all this waste and fraud, or they had no idea that, Elon had found all this different information, is entirely not true. Especially if you're talking to a senator or a representative who is constantly in talks regarding how to, whether or not certain agencies should get the certain amount of funding for their budget, et cetera, et cetera. And they request reports before they consider votes on or any talks on budget. So this idea that they are just finding this information is not true, because all this information is very transparent. It's very accessible. They can go to any department agency, or they have access to all the SESs and all the acting directors or directors of these agencies. Senior executive.
Somebody in management is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Right. I'm so used to the acronym that I forget what they, but they have access to so much personnel. They have access to so much data that's been existing. They've been able to get access for over a century now. It's not like this is new. That this information, the idea that they're just doing that Elon's finding all this information is entirely not true, and they're just trying to lie the American public to making them to think that there is a deep state when there isn't until very recently, which is Elon and what this administration is doing by trying to, bunch up a bunch of billionaires as possible into our cabinet so that they can do as much as they can to cut the federal government.
Yeah.
I'll answer the question. Now that we've been thrown in this situation, I will say that, I've heard from both sides that they're having feeling that, that the federal government was, like you said, bulging. I think you said, what's your word?
Yeah.
Loaded. And I would argue that, if that were to be the case, why are we not coming up with a strategic plan to fix that problem instead of cutting the wings of an airplane while it's flying, right? So, and on top of that, I would also argue that, the federal government does so many services, where how many hundreds of millions of people. To expect a skeleton of the federal government is a little unreasonable. And not only that, is that the actual number of federal employees and federal positions hasn't really grown substantially over the years. What perhaps has grown is the contractors. That
Fair
perhaps
point.
has grown, right? So why do we have so many federal contractors? It's because we cannot hire any more direct federal employees, right? There's a limit. And when you hire federal contractors, it's more expensive because now you're paying a company to do that. So I would argue to save money, we should convert some of those contractors to federal employees. But then you would have it, logically speaking,
Right.
like if you look through the rationale, you would say, if this is so bloated, we're spending so much money, it's actually cheaper to hire someone into public service than to award a contract to a federal contractor, right? So I think that if there's a problem, it's there. But I think one, you need a strategic plan. You can't just chop off. One of my colleagues said this analogy, and I really like it, so I'm gonna say it. So it's kind of like, you're a little overweight and you want us to lose 100 pounds. And instead of losing 100 pounds and coming up with a plan, a nutritional guide, a workout plan, you just chop off your limbs and you lost your 100 pounds. So you said what you were going to do, but at what cost? And that's kind of what I'm saying is, if a bloated government, there needs to be a plan in place, a bipartisan plan in place to reduce that. And also to see why if we have so many services and we require so many contractors, maybe that means something, right? Maybe that means something. So that's what I would say to that on that.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like, I've always saw how ridiculous it was that they hire so many contractors, and yet they provide and there's so many loopholes trying to get these people already who spent years working in the federal government, but they're in the contracting side before they can ever become an FTE, which is like a full-time employee with the federal government. And so this idea that yes, the government was already dwindling, but they have all these slew of contractors that were just doing the equal amount of work as many federal employees were. So yeah, just that should also be an example. If there was a place where they could find how to streamline the government, the contract side would have been something that could have been something they could laser focus on, try to see how they could get these contractors into federal employee jobs so that they can trim the fat, as they like to call it. But I also want to talk about when it comes to whether they're doing any real waste or fraud
Go ahead.
search. It's that just at the speed of how we're doing all this. And then people will say, well, they've been planning this for over a year. Hundreds, thousands of federal workers have been fired. Looking at USAID, 5,200 out of the 6,200 contracts were canceled. And people will say, of course, well, they had, a year planning before, Donald Trump was elected into office. But then you look at all the things that they're doing to try to roll back all these cuts that they've been doing. When they, fired people who were handling nuclear weapons and they had to hire them back.
Right.
And when they were fired people from USDA and the NSF, and then they were forced to hire them back. And when they tried to block foreign aid that was already distributed to partners and foreign partners for USAID, and now they're having to bring that back because it's illegal. This is all wasting government time and spending doing all these frivolous cuts and illegal firing. Yeah. Because these people are going to have to come back. You have to give them back pay. All this, you're wasting a judge's time, and you're having to spend money on these lawsuits only to end up losing. And then there's even more lawsuits. I think around 18 states are suing the federal government for all these illegal firings, which are also, money to be spent on these lawsuits. Where is the waste and fraud that you're trying to stop? If you're just adding more waste and fraud by doing this.
Right. And I'll add, I think I mentioned to you, Tanya, about the inspector generals, right? That's what they're for. There was a recent interview of, and there was a recent interview of a few of them, and a few of them, but a few of them, were excited about the idea of Doge and working to help them in finding, the waste, fraud, and abuse. Right. And maybe in a little bit more of an efficient manner.
Right, exactly.
Maybe with the help of AI, maybe they could fast track some of their reports or what are their recommendations with that. So I think it's telling that, one, they're getting fired for speaking out, the inspector generals, and two, no, the Doge is not working with the inspector generals, who are our agency's essential auditors, right?
Right.
You cannot, you mentioned we were both in science, you cannot go into a data set with millions and millions and millions of rows of data, have no idea what these columns mean, what this data means, and just make a decision to filter by, you can go into something like that You can't do that.
Tell me more about that, because you said that you need to protect the science because they're purging databases in really strange ways. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, you went to NCBI, so I don't know if you just start.
Well, that's the thing. They are being very transparent on how they're accessing this information, and that's what's causing a lot of panic, internal and external panic, that we're not getting the information that we need to know how they're actually infiltrating these databases. And that's what's causing this idea that there is probably going to be an erosion very soon, or there is already erosion that's begun, because there's this way we are only able to work with or gain the trust of people who use our databases by showing that we're credible, showing that there are ample amount of people who have the experience and the expertise, and they're the only ones who have access to this data, and the only ones who are managing it and are making sure the security around it is strong and effective. But if we're out, and if we are having, malignant actors that we have no idea who they are and have access to sensitive systems, and we're allowing people like 20-year-olds and people who have like no security clearance go into federal agencies and have access to servers, I mean, that's not going to garner a lot of trust for the people who are constantly relying on our databases to have access to our data. And also it's going to make our databases less secure all across the world, because there are so many other scientists from various different institutions of countries like Japan, Korea, the UK, other parts of Europe, India, who, faithfully distribute data to our databases and data repositories. And if they're seeing what's going on here in the United States, that's all the information that they're getting. That's all the information we can give them, because DOPE is not being transparent at all. Mm. We're going to be losing so much credibility and so much of like the world renown that we've had with our databases, and they're going to turn to other places. And then that power that we had, that the ranking that we had amongst the scientific community when it comes to data research and sequence data research is going to be completely erased or very diminished.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that additionally, right now, something that I'm really concerned about is the censorship of science. So, there were in the early days of DOE, which was seen like a millennia ago, they were putting down websites, right? They were trying off websites. So scientists had to go in and just download data sets. So at least there was some sort of archive of these data sets, or, they're no longer the climate data set on the White House may not be available anymore because people don't believe in climate change anymore. Or, if there was some sort of the guidelines, I know that was also talked about, that was pulled down. I'm not sure if it's back up, but the LGBTQ guidelines for HIV, or for different, for clinicians to use those protocols and those procedures, things are being censored. And that is very concerning, because, there is a list of words that have been, basically shared among the agencies and universities and grant writers for these, science research, that basically say, if it includes one of these words, be careful, because it's going to be flagged. And it might not. And some of these words is just, some of these words are like the triggered words, I guess, climate change or, LGBTQ, things like that. But you also have things that just don't make sense. You have bias towards biases. How are you going to do any statistical analysis without including something about bias?
Right.
How are you going to do anything?
Yeah.
Ethnicity, race, female. How are you going to categorize science, a paper by male versus female?
It's crazy.
Or by like different races. So if some of these are just what's not popular with this administration, but some of these really is just like, it's basic science. Any paper is going to have these things. Shouldn't be flagged. People shouldn't be worried about how are they going to change the word so it doesn't get flagged, because
is that what people who are still there are doing? They're having to like figure out the language and just to get the paper here. Wow.
These universities and whatnot that are working on submitting grants to the NIH or NSF or anything along those lines, now have to be careful if they want to talk about looking at a specific outcome, a male versus female, or looking at climate change, or looking at something else. Now they have to be careful about that type of research, and that's dangerous.
One example of that in mind, before I was hired, I worked with a lot of international collaboration projects, and international was the word that we had to figure out whether or not to use in the next.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's wild. It's really, really concerning times, not just for, the agencies, but just as a scientist, I just feel like that's also something that I'm just like raising the alarms of like, this is not a good timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys, you've put a coalition together and it's called Latinos in Government. And I'm wondering though, did either of you feel like your firing was related to DEI in any way?
You know what? I don't think so, because I just feel like there was so little thought into it. There was just so little thought that they said, I don't personally,
Gotcha.
But I don't.
No, I 100% agree. There has been so much confusion and so much lack of knowledge and discrepancy when it comes to all this that I don't think that was even that was not even in their minds when they were firing employees. But the DEI office shutters, and
That is true.
that was definitely a direct attack on DEI.
Right.
And this is a thing that I wish a lot of people knew more about and I know it's the reason why people are against it is they're very anti-racist and there's a lot of anti-feminist this sentiments behind it. But DEI is so that every community in this country is well represented, or at least has an opportunity to work not only for the federal government, for a variety of different institutions and sectors in our country. Because there are a lot of places, particularly in the science and medical community, for example, and where there's not enough research done for people of color, for Latinos. There's, if we look at the maternity rates that are in this country, women of color are more likely to die from birth than, any other race in the United States. And that's the reason why DEI is so important. So that not only just so that, more people, more Latinos can work at certain businesses or companies, but so that we have people there who represent a community and they can speak for that community for any type of the work that a organization or a sector or a federal agency is doing.
Right. And sometimes DEI also gets lumped like it's just synthesized and just aggregated to mean like race. And it's really not. It's accessibility.
Right.
It's people with disabilities.
It's grossly misunderstood. I totally agree.
It's grossly, yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about your
It's funny how that no one realized that DEI affects everyone. It affects even the most racist person in this country. Like, well, DEI is also for you, because if DEI didn't exist, there could be a chance that you won't be represented one day.
Right.
It's there so you can have those guardrails.
So tell me about what Latinos in Government are up to or plan to be up to.
Oh, well, this is kind of a grassroots effort. This is all kind of building the ship as it goes. So I met Susanny just a few weeks ago, and this stemmed from the Fort Rock Coalition event on the Hill. And, there was a bunch of us, and there were only 30 Spanish speakers that could talk to the press. That felt comfortable talking to the press. So, we just bought that whole day. We were talking to them because we were the only ones to talk to, right? So, and both of the news channels, they told us, they're like, it's so hard to find people that speak Spanish from the Latino community to interview, to talk, to put a face to the name.
Okay.
So that's where it kind of started from. So I kind of was like, hey, let's create a group chat. And then the group chat just kind of slowly started to grow. And now we have people from the CFPB, we have people from
Excellent.
So we're just trying to grow this. And really, if there are opportunities to speak to the Latino community, that's great.
Okay.
That's fantastic. More power to that. But it's also just to kind of have a safe space for
Right. Understood.
Latinos and Spanish speakers. And so that's kind of how it evolved. We're in the work slowly. It's starting to grow. It's been growing. We've been talking to a few Congress people to maybe on the Hispanic caucus to maybe be able to collaborate on things together. There's a very well-known, well-respected organization called Blacks in Government. I want to reach out to them to see if they can give us tips. I don't really know what I'm doing. And then
She says that, but she's been doing so much. Like, she wrote a letter to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We were actually able to meet with the leader of the caucus.
Excellent.
Yeah. So she said,
you might have a new career in politics, it sounds like.
Yeah. No, she's been doing so much, and we want to kind of group this all together and made us feel like, hey, we can actually do this. And so,
for sure.
And so this is also all of that 100%. And also, it's allowed us to kind of understand that we're no more than just one Latino, because a lot of us probably felt like we were the only Latino in our agency or in our office. And grouping us all together has made us really understand that, no, there's a big representation of Latinos in the federal government, and we need to group more of us together and try to find make a like official group within the Blacks in government, so that we can have statistics in case something like this were to happen again.
Right.
Have more and be able to form as a coalition, come to representatives and show this is how it's affecting the Latino community.
Yes.
We're Latino workers. We work for the federal government, and it's affecting us.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One is to create a connection with the Latino community, and then to be like, hey, we're your sons and daughters too, and we are also getting affected by this, and this is also affecting you this way.
Right.
In their language.
Right.
And the other one would also be to, I don't know that many Latinos in agencies, right? I don't know that many. So, and I think that's kind of this idea, and not just at my agency where I, was a fellow, but in the other one.
So you have hope to return to the government, it sounds like.
My dream, being a fellow at USAID was a dream job. It showed the best in people, it showed the best in Americans, and it showed what the American people valued in making the world a better place and lending a helping hand. The working in the United States government, regardless of the administration, is an honor. It's an honor. And the people at the agency, I'm sure just like NIH, had worked there for decades. And they were happy to work under a Republican administration or a Democrat administration. So, never say never. My dream was crushed. I feel like it was robbed from me. So a lot of this advocacy is also kind of just trying to find something bigger than what's happening right now. But never say never. If there's an opportunity where I can apply my skill set to do good, then why not?
And Susanny, you're appealing your job cut, correct?
Yeah, I'm appealing with the MSPB, mostly because what they did was illegal. Right. And so I'm going to go through the due process and make sure that they either compensate me for their legal actions or they give me my job back. But for me, obviously, when I started trying to find a way how to fight back on this, I heard about the Feds Work for You and the 4 Coalition with Adriana, and then I met a bunch of other fired NIH workers. It grew from just me trying to figure out how to fight back at this, because it started out of spite. So it's you can't do this to me. But then it grew up to a whole lot more, because I saw how many people work in the federal government who are so much smarter than me, so much more talented, have more dedicated years in public service than I've. And they were I'm listening to people's stories made me realize this is much bigger than me. And of course, I joined the government because I wanted to provide a service to the American people. But then I was looking at all these people and I was like, these are the Americans. These are the people that, they want to do just as much, probably a lot more, and have done a lot more than I have. And I do want to continue working for the federal government, because those are the types of Americans that I want to be surrounded by. Those are the type of people I want to work with, because I've worked in the private sector for 10 years before I joined public service. Yeah, that's why I keep on fighting, because I want everyone else to have their jobs back, so that when I get my job back, I continue, the people I've been doing activism work with, I continue to work with those type of people, because those are the people I want back working.
That's a great sentiment. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure the public knows?
I would just say on the USAID side, as a fellow there, USAID, a lot of misinformation is coming out about the types of programs and what was being funded. I would just ask people to please look into that and fact check things. I would also just remind people, or maybe people don't know, programs take years to get off the ground. But what one administration wanted to try to implement and start and plan, and they're in year 4, but they weren't going to be there next year, they get voted out. That program is still being planned, right? So, it's never going to be exactly what your administration wants, but the civil servants that work there and the contractors and everyone will do what the administration and what the heads of, the appointed people tell us to do, right? So if they're like, we're not going to focus on this anymore, we're going to focus on this, they were ready to do that. And I just want to say, like, I was not there as a long time, but the time that I was there, it was an honor. It was a privilege to work there as a fellow. I met the most inspiring people. And really, I truly feel that it was like just the best people like America has to offer. So I just want to put that out there on that.
Okay. I don't have a question, but I do have like a statement, and where I just want to remind people that the government only exists to make its people tolerable, the life of its people tolerable. And in order to make it tolerable, it needs to have some relation to its population, for example, the American government needs to have a relation to the American public. And the only way the American government is able to have that connection is through its federal workers. It's through the people that they hire from the American public. Because that's who we are. We are the American public serving the American public. Once we no longer work there, or once we are no longer able to do our jobs, then the federal government ceases to exist. There is no purpose for the federal government. And I want people who are watching this, or anyone who is listening right now, to understand that we're only here to work for you. That's the only reason people come to work for the federal government, because they swore an oath on the Constitution to provide services to the American people. And once that's no longer our purpose, then we actually have no more work to do. And anyone who is kind of worried about what their service, what's happening with Elon Musk and Donald Trump and their services being delayed or eliminated, I just want to say that you still have power. Federal workers, fired ones, current ones, are still fighting so that they can just continue to provide your services, but that you can do it too. There's a website called hold on. I have it. It's saveourpublicservices.com. Wait, it's somewhere. It's Save Our Public Services.
Out here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's go.savepublicservices.com. And there, everyone who wants to be able to know how to support federal workers, how to fight against what's not only happening with federal workers, but with every American, because all these services, either Americans rely on, you are going to rely on eventually, or you are relying on them right now, because federal government is so intrinsic in American society that there's just so many things that we're doing for you right now that you're not aware of. So go savepublicservices.com.
Call your congressman and senator.
Yes, call your congressman. Go to a town hall. Go to a protest, or just join a group and, go to your hobby group or something like that and tell people what's going on with federal workers and try to figure out what you can do to help stop what's happening, because it's not just only federal workers, but just with what the administration is doing daily with American people.
Understood.
So, save public services.
Thank you so much for joining me. And we will definitely get this message out and hope to affect some change for the better.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for the invitation and allowing us to use our voices for good. Thank you.
You bet.